Sergeant Horace Julian Mitchell, United States Army, World War II. Folks, I've got a treat for you today. We're going to hear from a man who fought in Italy during World War II. And I want to encourage all of you Vietnam listeners to really key in on these World War II stories. If it wasn't for these World War II veterans, we wouldn't have had the things that we have today. So let's just really honor these veterans as we watch these stories and give them some attention, because they deserve it. They're the first love of my work. And I'm just happy. I have so many of these stories in my archives. Horace's story's been sitting there since I interviewed him in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And yes, I've been to Milwaukee. It was April the 6th, 2008. I appeared on the local television there. I think it was Channel 6, WITI, I believe, in Milwaukee. If some of you are from there, you might know that. So this is just a great story. I interviewed so many amazing people at that time. I have a few of the stories featured, but Horace is still with us today at 99 next week. He turns 100 years old, born in 1924. Farm boy from Ohio, drafted in 1942, December. Found himself in combat at 19 years of age. Worked up the ranks to a sergeant. And he just tells a great story through his eyes and ears of what fighting in Italy was like. Now, I have a lot of fighting in France and Germany, which he did also, but he was focused in Italy with his unit. He was with the 5th Army in World War II, 1943, the 3rd Division, 1st Battalion, Charlie Company, as a rifleman and as a wireman. So he did a lot of things in the war. He had 1 Bronze Star for his actions and gallantry, and 7 unit citations or Bronze Stars. Amazing. They fought amazing battles. He fought at Casablanca, Anzio, you remember the old movie Anzio, bloody Salerno, and also at Monte, Cassino, which was the Battle of Rome. Folks, doesn't get any better than this. I'm telling you, let's key in on this. This is a powerful story. Just one of the best stories I have, and I don't have a lot of stories from those who fought in Italy, so this is just really, really good stuff. And I'm really happy about it. And Chet, I already let you know, Chet Howard makes it possible for some of my stories, and I just thank Chet. He's been a great inspiration to me in my work. Love you, brother. Going to see you soon in Ohio, and we have a lot in common. And you're one of my guys, as it were, with my veterans, so take ownership in that, brother. Love you. So, okay. Thank you, Chet. Folks, I have a prayer request. I know that's going to sound odd coming from this platform, but if you know me, you know my heart. I love my God, and prayer works. Terry Simmons, he's one of my Vietnam veterans from South Carolina. Interviewed him about 15, 16 years ago at Spartanburg, South Carolina. He's in the hospital in the VA, and I've been in contact with his wife, Angie, who's helped support some of our stories, our female stories. Say a prayer for Terry. He's needing some help. He's having a hard time right now. Hopefully he'll make it through what he's going through, but I'm just going to ask those of you who know how to pray or want to pray, even if you don't know how to pray, just ask God to help Terry Simmons. He's one of the most watched stories I have on my YouTube channel. A lot of you are familiar with Terry, so just say a prayer for him, and that would be greatly appreciated. And any thoughts you want to send in the comments, I will send those to Angie, his wife. So thank you. Folks, if you'd like to sponsor a story, I'm not hearing from hardly anybody. I would love to have you sponsor a story. I have a lot of stories. If you would look at the video description, under every video, some of you, where's that at? It's right under the video. You see the words that you probably never read, and it has the word more. Click on that, you'll read the video description. It's very short. If you'd like to sponsor a story, just click on that. It will take you to a page on my website where you'll see pictures of some of my veterans, not all of them, and you just find one you want, click on the link and add their name, and it's as easy as that. So I'm going to put a call out for that. I could use some more sponsors out there. Folks, I don't monetize these videos. There's no commercials. Some people go, you need to run commercials. I don't want commercials. Who wants to interrupt a story every 5 minutes or whatever YouTube does? I don't do that. So in exchange, I ask for people to help donate and sponsor my stories. So a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. You see the final product. And there's a lot of work that goes into these interviews and into the production of this, and it'll be greatly appreciated. This is listener supported, as it were. My radio station, the same thing, Voices of History Radio, and I would encourage you to tune that in. It's a great, great station. 24 hours a day you can hear these stories when you're going to sleep, waking up, driving, commuting, truck drivers, students in schools, parents, grandparents. Get this in the hands of our kids. Living history in the palm of their hands. It's a blessing. So there's information in the video description. If you'd like to donate to my work, in the comment section, when you look at a video, you see the comments. The first comment is always mine. Click on the link and you can donate to my work. So God bless you. Thank you for watching and listening and sharing these stories, folks. I went longer today on purpose because there was just a lot to share. So we'll get into Horace's story. It's one of my best, and I hope you can share this with others. And let's honor him. He's still alive, almost 100 years old. God bless you, Horace. I'm going to salute you, and thank you for telling me your story almost 20 years ago. Talk to you soon, everybody. Into the military.
I received my initial draft notice in December 1942. We were living on a farm in Ohio, and there was a possibility that I would be deferred, so I didn't enlist. And finally my father said, well, look, I'll take care of the farm and you go to work in a mill. And I went to Cincinnati. We had been living in Ohio. And I went to work for Lunkenheimer Valve Company, and they were making valves for seagoing vessels. And I stayed there working for several months, and I received a notice from the draft board that to report for duty. And I went down, and come to find out that there was another Horace Mitchell in Cincinnati. And they said, oh, you're not that Horace Mitchell that we're looking for. And it took several weeks to get the things straightened out. In fact, I received my next notice in March to report for duty at Fort Thomas, Kentucky, which is just across the river from Cincinnati. And from there I went to Fort McClellan, Alabama, and I had 6 weeks of basic training, infantry training, and a lot of calisthenics and range work. And also at the time they were instructing us in voice radio and telephone, how to climb poles and operate switchboards and things like that. And I had some training for the telegraph, which I didn't care for. I wasn't too good with that. But I was since I'd been living on a farm, I was very good at climbing trees and poles. And the basic was cut short because there were problems in Africa. And practically the whole base moved out to Fort Meade, Maryland, and then to Fort Patrick Henry, Virginia. And in just a few weeks, we were landing in Casablanca, North Africa.
So how old are you at this time?
18.
Wow, so you've never been in combat before?
No, excuse me, let me correct that. I passed my 18th birthday, I was 19.
Okay, so you're getting older there.
Yeah.
What was your MOS? What was your job?
Well, I was a rifleman, and we also had training with the rifle and machine gun and mortar in the 6 weeks basic. And I can't tell you what my MOS was. I was just infantryman,
I don't
you know.
even know the number, but now, what year did you go to Europe then?
That was not, okay, I went in 1943.
Okay, so let me go back just a second. Do you remember Pearl Harbor, the attack?
Oh, of course.
Tell me what you remember about that day and hearing the...
What do I remember about Pearl Harbor? Well, we did not have a radio, and we had no electricity. And I only learned about it on Monday when I got on the school bus. The driver said, "Did you hear about Pearl Harbor?" But I was always good in geography, and I knew where Pearl Harbor was. And what I remember about it is that I felt that I should go enlist. But when I got home that night, my father said, no, you're most likely going to be exempt for farm work, you know. But then a few weeks later, he said, go to Cincinnati and get yourself a job in a mill, and I did. And then the mix-up came in identities, and when that was straightened out, that was March of 43. And from there to Fort Thomas, Kentucky, to Fort McClellan and Basic.
So tell me the major campaigns you were at.
Okay. I received a star for Naples, Naples, Brindisi, then Anzio, then southern France, Central Europe, Germany, and altogether 7. I'm trying to remember all of the.
Salerno?
Yes, I landed at Salerno and was at Monte Cassino, and then they pulled us because we had so many casualties in October of 43. They pulled us off the line, and we thought for rest and recuperation and retraining and replacements. But they surprised us by giving us amphibious training. So we thought that we were going to go around the boot and up through the Adriatic and land possibly at Venice, or at north of Rome at, say, Pisa. But they surprised us by making the end run only to Anzio, which is 25 miles south of Rome.
Well, let's stop there. Tell me about Anzio. Tell me about the landing and the ensuing battle and your part in that.
Okay, we landed on the 22nd of January at night. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think it was around 4 o'clock in the morning and it was still dark. And when the Higgin boat went over the sandbar and the ramp went down, I stepped out on dry land. Not all Higgins made it over the sandbar, but apparently it was the way we were loaded. And for the first 24 hours, the only firing that we heard was further to our east in this town of Anzio Natuna, and some artillery, and then some naval vessels were firing into the town, and also began to fire into the mountains and into the few towns that were near the beach. Caserta, no, not Caserta, excuse me. Trying to remember the name of the town. Anyway, we went into the attack on the second day, and we made it inland about 5 miles. And then we stopped and prepared to go the next morning into another attack, which we did. But by the third day, the German 19th Army, which was stationed north of Rome, nobody realized how very close the army was, and they surrounded our beachhead, which was 17 miles from north to south in a semicircle, and 10 miles max depth. And that's as far as we ever reached, was 10 miles inland. And day after day after day, we were preparing to attack, and the casualties were extremely heavy. And I then was selected to be a wireman rather than a rifleman. I think because too many of the wire people had been killed. And but it wasn't a pleasant job because you were more exposed to the Germans being out in the daytime. And Anzio, from the beach to the mountains, was as flat as this carpet. And that was the excuse me, the terrible thing, there was constant small arms because we were going to the line companies, and there were a few gullies that you could lay the line in, but you had to get out of the gullies and cross open spaces, and you received small arms, and as soon as they spotted you, artillery would come in. Self-propelled 88s, mortars, just sometimes it seemed like days that they were firing at you, but actually it was, they laid down a barrage, and if they didn't get you, they'd raise the barrage. And because the Germans, we understood, were short of ammunition, and they were very conservative. They did have a lot of what's called interdictory fire, which at crossroads and at certain villages that you'd pass, they would fire a great deal more. And I'll tell you one incident that I remember very vividly. I was told by the communications sergeant that I had to go out and lay a line to Charlie Company. And I did. And on my way out to Charlie Company through a ditch, then I had to get out of the ditch and get up on the flat ground, and the Germans began firing mortars. And they were dropping all around me, but because the ground was so moist, they'd go deep into the ground, and if they exploded, it was just a muffled roar. And they followed me all the way to Company C. I got the line back in. And then on the way back, I guess they were anticipating my return. And the very same thing happened. One shell after another following me, and I was running zigzag across the field so that they wouldn't have a line of fire on me all the time. But I made it back to our command post without any major problem. And that was a relief, to say the least. But then I'd have to go out that same day, most likely, to lay the line, which had been destroyed by artillery. Or if it was the next day, a tank would have run over the line and tore it up. So you had to keep telephone communication with all of the outlying companies. And in a regiment, there are 3 battalions, and I was in the 1st. And of course, there was headquarters company A, B, C, and D. And all of the lines had to be kept in. You might ask the question, why were not telephones used? Very simple. The Germans had captured enough of our radio equipment in Africa and Sicily and southern Italy. They had all of our frequencies, and you couldn't speak freely on the radio. So the most secure means of communication were through telephone lines. And so always out putting in lines, and they were constantly being torn up, primarily at night by tanks. But artillery destroyed a lot of them too.
So are you guys advancing? You're holding positions?
We're really holding positions at the beachhead because the beachhead never expanded beyond the 10 miles deep. And there were units on the perimeters which held the sides. On the side closest to Rome, and it was only 25 miles away, the British were there. And fortunately, to our south were the Pontine marshes. And it was almost impossible for any unit to come through the marshes. There were acres and acres of water that had not been drained by Mussolini. In fact, the whole beachhead at one time had been part of the Pontine Marsh, but Mussolini had dredged the canals, drained it, turned it into farmland.
When you landed on that beach at night, was there enemy fire coming?
Very little in our sector, but to our left down toward the city or the town of Anzio Natuna, there was small arms fire. But we had, the first 24 hours, we had no direct fire on us. The second day it began, and intensified by the third day when we were ready to go into the attack.
Were there any friends of yours that were wounded or killed at this time?
Yes.
Were you with them?
Yes.
Can you give me a story
Oh,
that comes to mind?
I had a friend from Cleveland, Ohio, who had been in basic with me, and he had been married just a day or two before he left, and for Italy. And I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Richardson. And he was a very devoted man to his wife, and he learned that she was pregnant. And she had sent him a cigarette lighter, a kind of lighter that you could light your cigarettes on and wouldn't be seen in the dark. It had a little shield around it. And Richardson said to me, Mitch, if anything happens to me, will you take my lighter and send it back to my wife? And I said, oh, nothing's going to happen to you. But after that comment, I never saw him again. He was killed in the attack that day. And a friend of mine from Tupelo, Mississippi, who had gone through basic, he and I had been very close, and we had wanted to be in the same unit. But when it came to dividing up the assignments, he got another company, and I got to be the lineman for Charlie Company. And I saw him the day he was wounded. We were moving toward the front, and a truck came along, and Bob, whose last name I cannot remember, it's terrible, I saw him standing in the truck, and I said, what happened? And he said he's had a serious wound in his leg. Although I heard indirectly from him again, and corresponded with him during the war and then after the war, but then eventually lost contact with him. Those are the two particular stories. But I was also acquainted with the company medic. He and I hit it off, and the reason we hit it off is I didn't have trench foot from southern Italy, but I had very, very serious, I forget the terminology for it, but blisters on between my toes. And he took me at sick call and washed my feet. And on Anzio, I went out to lay a line, and I ran across his body. It was a boy from New York.
What was the objective of us in this part of Italy or whatever,
Well,
Anzio? I mean, are we pushing our way towards Germany? I mean,
Oh, no. We had been tied up at Monte Cassino for so long. The battle at Monte Cassino really started in October of '43, and the intensity increased until January. It's the longest battle of the Second World War. And the 3rd Division was pulled off because of such heavy casualties. I'm not sure of the statistics. I'd have to look it up again. But on the 16th of October, in our company alone, we had 69 casualties. That may be inaccurate. I haven't checked into that lately. I do have references to the morning reports that I can check it out on. But anyway, because the Germans held us up at Monte Cassino, they decided that the 3rd Infantry Division would make the end run, go back to Naples, take vessels, and land at Anzio Natuna, which was 25 miles from Rome, thinking that this was going to cut off the Germans in the south at Monte Cassino. But the British, who were in the 7th British Army on the east coast, over on the Adriatic, also were having trouble advancing in the mountains. And so the whole front just froze there. Not only Monte Cassino, but Anzio Netuna. And we were there from the 22nd of January until the 25th of May, when we finally made the breakout. But one of the reasons, and a lot of people wouldn't admit this, is because the Germans were going to pull out of Monte Cassino. And the front collapsed, and we were in Rome by the 4th of June. And of course, the 6th of June was the landings in Normandy.
Were you aware of the D-Day landings? Even though
Yes. It was announced to us on the night of the 4th and the morning of the 6th that there was a pending invasion on the 5th. You know, they delayed it one day. And then when the news came through on the 6th, we were delighted, thinking the war was going to be over in a few days. And of course, it was months and months and months before it was over. Yes, we were quite aware of it. But they pulled us out of Rome after 2 weeks, went back to Naples, and we took amphibious landing in the Gulf at Salerno.
Let me talk about Salerno. They called that Bloody Salerno?
Bloody Salerno.
Well, tell me why.
The casualties were just almost the heaviest any place in the Second World War in Europe. Only Kasserine Pass in North Africa had higher casualties.
So tell me, was there a landing there?
Yes, there was a landing. The 45th Division, Infantry Division, landed there on the 8th of September, and the 3rd went in on the 10th. But by that time, the beachhead had collapsed, and the Germans were pulling back through Naples. And there was very little resistance in Naples proper. And they pulled north to the Volturno River in the mountains near Caserta. And the 3rd Division, the 45th Division, and the 36th Division began to pursue the Germans up the Volturno River. You know, it comes down through central Italy. It's a very zigzag river. And the problem there was, because the valleys were not wide, you had to cross the river, sometimes twice in one day. And it wasn't a deep river, but in the wintertime, there was a lot of water. And it was extremely difficult in the rapids to cross. There was no way you could get across without getting wet. There were no low places where you could wade knee deep. And we had insufficient rubber boats, but you'd get tired of waiting and you just plunge into the rapids and get across the river. Anyway, when we were pulled off of Monte Cassino, because of casualties, we went back to a place called Baia Latina, which is in the mountains just north of Caserta. And there we thought we were going to rest and recuperate and have replacements. And we did, but we had a lot of training. And suddenly we find ourselves on the way back to Naples. And that's when we thought we were going to land on the east coast of the Adriatic at Venice or go up to Netuna, to Pisa. And incident I'll tell you about the training in Gulf of Salerno. We had destroyers and things like that, and landing craft and LCIs, LSTs, and we went down the ladders into the Higgins. And the Higgins boat that I was in had the communications sergeant and the first sergeant. And we were only just a few minutes away, and this is dark, only a few minutes away from the LST, and we began to take on water. And fortunately, we had a sergeant who was very, very thoughtful, and we had gasoline cans on board. So we emptied the gasoline cans, put the tops back on them, and said, there's some of you who don't swim, take a hold of the handle of the can, and when the boat is down, just hang onto the can and somebody will come to pick you up. And there were some with flashlights, and it was at night, and we were waving the flashlights and calling. And I would say in 20, 25 minutes, a destroyer came and picked us up and then transferred us to a landing craft, and we went in and hit the beach.
At Salerno?
At Salerno. But of course, the activity, the fighting was already over because we'd already gone up to Monte Cassino. But we were just practicing at Gulf of Salerno.
Now, what's Salerno? A body of water?
No, Salerno is a city south of Naples. I don't know what the population is, but it wasn't an enormous town.
Just the Americans there? Yeah, the Allies there.
The French were also there. And further, we landed closest to Naples. It's quite a large bay. And the French were next to us, and then further south were the Brits.
So you land, and you get out of the Higgins boats, you go ashore.
You go ashore, yeah.
And then you form up.
You form up and reassemble your unit, and then trucks would come to pick us up and take us back to our camp at Pazzulli, which is north of Naples.
Tell me a little bit about Salerno. Did it last a day, a week? And you mentioned the casualties. I mean, what's happening?
Okay.
Artillery or arms?
Okay, if we're talking about the 8th of September, when the 45th made the landing, the 3rd didn't make it on the 8th, they made it on the 10th. But by the 10th, the intensity of the fighting had greatly reduced. It was the 45th Division that had so many casualties at Salerno. And the problem at Salerno landing under fire was the mountains came right down to the sea, and the beach might only be, 100 feet wide, and then the mountains would start, and that was extremely difficult for the 45th, and for the 3rd too. But it was the 45th that had the highest casualties.
How close did you get to the Germans, like you and I are, or were they always at a distance?
Well, give you an incident on Anzio. I went out to lay a line, a telephone line, and I was able to lay it along Mussolini Canal and then went up a trench looking for Charlie Company to hook into their telephone because it had been knocked out. And they had moved from the branch that I was in to a side branch, and I did not know that. I bypassed their new location, and I walked right into the German lines. And I could hear the Germans speaking, and I said, what in the heck am I going to do? So I stashed my equipment, my carbine, and my telephone and a reel of wire under some bushes, and fortunately there was a hollow tree very close by, and I was able to squeeze into this hollow tree, and there was a hole in the tree, and I could see the Germans coming. So I was very quiet and hardly breathing, and a patrol came by, and there were 6 of them. Even if I had had my rifle, my carbine, I wouldn't have fired at them because I would have been so outnumbered. And I just stayed in the tree for perhaps 25 or 30 minutes, and they came back along the way. And when they were out of earshot and I didn't hear anything, I picked my equipment up and I went back down the ditch and met a guy from Charlie Company, and he says, "Oh, we moved last night." So I was able to hook up the phone,
And you're, what kind of weapon do you have?
I carried a carbine because the M1 was too heavy when you were laying lines. A reel of wire weighed about 30 pounds, and a carbine weighed about 4.5, 5 pounds. But a Garand would weigh 11 or 12 pounds. And when you had an ammunition belt full of ammo, you were talking about carrying maybe another 45 or 50 pounds of things.
Do you have any encounters with German tanks?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about the German tanks.
Well, not directly at at Anzio, but in France. I had to lay a line again into Epinal. And I laid the line, and I'm in the, they were in a building, the command post was in a building. And while I'm in the building hooking up the phone, a German tank comes down the street and stops immediately in front of our command post. So everybody's very quiet, and I was closer than these cars out here. And so everybody hush-hush, some went down in the basement, and some went to the back of the building. And American tanks been firing on the German tank. But the German tanks were so accurate, they knocked out 3 American tanks about a block away. But then they withdrew. And that's the closest encounter that I had with a German tank, was just, I could reach out the window and almost touch it. And could see the gunners and the driver of the tank.
Were you ever scared? I mean, that's kind of a silly question, but tell me about the fear of combat, or in combat, or maybe afterwards there's fear.
It never ended. You just had to take control of your emotion. There were many times I would not want to go out, but the job had to be done. And the first sergeant that I was very friendly with, he had been very instrumental in instructing me what to do. And he was from Mexico, New York, Larry Felt. And we hit it off. He was a school teacher. And maybe that's one of the reasons I went into teaching after the war, because of Larry. And but he'd say, you know, you always keep a pair of dry socks, keep your feet clean if nothing else, and well, I was with him when he was wounded. I was going to tell you about that. But we made it out of Anzio, and I don't remember exactly what day it was, maybe the 2nd of June. We were at Velletri after the breakout of Anzio. And I was so tired, I'd been up about 72 hours, and I'd already put in the line to Charlie Company 2 or 3 times that night and the day. And I said, I'm not going to do it again now. And Larry said, oh, yes, you are. He says, I'm going with you, and I'll carry the telephone, and you can carry the wire. And we were only about 100 yards from the command post, and the Germans fired on us, Nebelwerfer. And Nebelwerfer are rockets. And it was I don't know how long the Germans had it in use, but it fired 6 rounds consecutively, and they dropped in a ring all around you, and then there was one near the center of the ring. Anyway, we were standing very close together repairing the line. And Larry looked at me and he says, you have blood on your face. And I wiped my face and I said, I don't feel anything. And then I looked down in my hand close to him, and I had 2 of his ribs and part of his diaphragm in my hand. But he never collapsed. He kept saying, get in the goddamn line, get in the damn line. So I called for the medics as we continued to repair the line. The medics came, and 4 medics came with a pair of stretchers, set of stretchers. And just as they got there, there's another barrage of Nebelwerfer. 2 of the medics were killed right there. But they loaded 1 medic on who had been wounded, and then they put Larry on top of him, and the 2 started to leave. And the last thing Larry said to me was, get in the line. And I thought I'd never see him again because of the severity of his wound. But in about 6 months, I had a letter from him. He was in the hospital in Illinois, Scott Air Force, Fort Scott. And he said he was recovering very nicely, that he was going to stay in the service until the end of the war. and that he would be a first sergeant in an infantry company.
Wow.
And we never lost contact with each other. We continued to write, and after the war we met a couple of times. He came to visit me I had come back to Cincinnati, and we met and had a nice 4 or 5 days together. And then I went to visit him in Oyster Bay, New York. He was, by that time, a superintendent of Oyster Bay High School, and his wife was the librarian, and I spent a couple of nice days with them. And even though his wife died within a year, he and I continued to write, and we didn't see each other again, but we were always in touch by telephone or by letter. And I think it was 87 when one of the letters came back, and he was considerably older than I, so I assumed he was dead.
Are these memories, they seem pretty vivid. Your attention to detail is amazing. I mean, very well done. Does it seem like 60 years ago, or does it seem like yesterday sometimes, these memories?
Sometimes it seems very current. I do a lot of reading in history. I read my regimental and division history, and I read a lot of books about Italy and Anzio, and there's dozens of books about it. And if I come across something that I'm not aware of, I go back to my history and I reread it. And also I have written a lot about my experiences.
Well, you don't seem real troubled. I talk to a lot of Vietnam vets who go through things, and they seem more troubled or agitated when they're telling me their story. Why do you seem so calm and collected when you tell me this story?
Well, I go back to France. How many trips have I made back? 30 perhaps, to reenactment groups.
Wow.
And the reenactors are sons and grandsons of people who were in the French army. And they were always asking me to relate to them my experiences. And I've never forgotten them because I've been repeating these things so many different times.
But as a young man at the time, though, this was life and death. I mean, what got you through the tough times? Was it just your training or your faith in God or what?
Training, and I was reared as, I really think, a Spartan, don't you think? My mother was very Spartan.
Yeah.
And my father also. If you cut your finger doing something or spilled hot water on yourself, you never said ouch or anything like that. You just grin and bear it. And I think that that's what helped me through the war. If it was dangerous, I was afraid, naturally. But I would never, ever say, oh, I can't do that. I said that once, and Larry said, oh, yes, you're going to do it, old buddy.
But your training, you were trained...
Oh, the training at home and the training in the service. And I think Larry was a great, great influence on my life in the service. He was a school teacher, but he had gone into the Second World War, maybe the day after Pearl Harbor. And
Wow.
he was very patriotic. And I think that that's what led me through the war, because we were together from 43 through June 45. And
when you see pictures of yourself back then, what do you think about?
Gee, what a handsome guy.
They all were good looking.
I don't know about that. I'm just joking.
I think you probably were.
Well, I brought some pictures to show you.
Yeah, when we're done, I want to take a look. But,
Okay.
We're not quite done, but I could probably listen to you for a long time. It just you're telling it so great. I mean, I haven't had a lot of stories about Anzio or Salerno, so this is enlightening to me. So our whole objective in all this is to push the Germans back, or just to
To push the Germans back, and we really didn't think about it too much until we really got acquainted with the French unit that was attached to us. The 7th Regiment was the liaison unit with the French Première Armée Française. And we would have French officers visit us every once in a while. And we enjoyed it because they'd always bring some wine. And they loved American food, and they were dressed in American uniforms. So it was almost like they're being part of our unit. And now going back for the reenactments, all of the French wear American uniforms, just as their grandfathers and fathers did during the Second World War. The only thing that changed, the French began to have their own helmet and their own insignia, of course, but they wore the American uniform.
How long were you overseas?
Let's see. Initially in Africa, Italy, about 28 months.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
And when did you leave? I mean, was it the end of the war? You were there to the end?
The war ended in May, of course. We received the word on the night of the 7th, with final signing on the 8th. And it was based on a point system. Your decorations, and at the time the only thing I had was a soldier's medal. And the 7 bronze stars that went on my European Theater of Operation badge.
You got 7 bronze stars?
Yes.
Are you serious? Wow. What were the citations for these?
Well, these were for the campaigns.
Okay, gotcha.
I should correct that.
I understand.
I have 1 bronze star for, it's described as heroic action against the enemy.
Tell me about that bronze star.
Well, I went out to lay a line, and just before I was leaving the command post, the CO said to me, you know, Mitch, you've got to take a group of replacements out to Charlie Company with you. But he said, I want them out there as soon as possible, and I do not want you to follow your line. I want you to go across the field. But the field was filled with mines. And I said, oh my gosh, Captain Solomon. I said, you know, you're sending us all out there to be blown to pieces. And he said, no, they swept a path through the minefield late last night, and he said they put down markers. And he said, follow inside those markers and you'll get over there. So I led 39 or 40 men to Charlie Company as replacement. And I never thought anything about it. I just part of the job. And in a few weeks, I had a Bronze Star.
Boy, you're an amazing man. Yeah? This is incredible. I'm impressed by how well you remember all this. I know you read a lot, but still, it seems like it's just so vivid in your mind as you retell all this.
Well, I'm sure that if I think about it, there are things that I don't remember. Although, as I do remember them, I jot lines down, like the incident of the tree. And there was another 2 incidents involving trees, which I didn't tell you, but I'm writing about them.
Good, good.
And the other thing is, I had a wonderful experience in France. We crossed the Doubs, or the Doubs River, going into Besançon. And on the last bridge standing over the river, and we went up this dirt road and came to a very high wall. And there was a little offset in the wall. And we had our rations with us. And further down this road, we could hear machine gun and rifle fire. So we decided that we would eat then and get rid of some of our rations so we didn't have to carry them. And upstairs, maybe 2 stories high, a window opens, and a woman speaking perfect English said, "What are you doing down there?" And they said, "Well, we're waiting to go into Besançon." And she said, "Don't leave, I'll be right down." And in a few minutes, the double doors, where we were in front of, opened, and a woman steps out, beautifully dressed like she just stepped out of Glamour magazine. Hat, gloves, purse, basket, a scarf, a fur piece. And she says, I'm going with you. And we said, oh, madam, you can't go with us. Hear the machine gun. She said, the Boche, that's what the French called the Germans, took my last rations and they took my last horse this morning. And she said, I'll miss that horse, but I need to get some bread for my children. And she had 3 children. And so we decided that we'd give her all of our rations. So we filled her basket, and I was eating a can of corn. And she kept looking down, looking down. I said, are you hungry? She said, yes, I'm very hungry. So she reached down and took my can of corn, took the spoon I had in my hand and wiped it on my shoulder. So precise, yet, it was a shock. I vividly remember that. She finished the can of corn, handed the can and the spoon back to me, and she says, well, in France, we don't eat corn. We feed that to the animals. Well, that's not the rest of the story. Almost 50 years to the week, in one of the reenactments, we're in Besançon. And I'm talking about this experience with the wife of one of the reenactors. And she says, describe that place to me. And I did. And she says, I know right where that is. So we jumped in our Jeeps and drove over there. And we're standing in the very same place. And again, a window opens upstairs. And a woman who's speaking French wanted to know what we wanted. And some of the French ladies said, oh, Sergeant Mitchell is here. He's come back to visit a spot where he'd been almost 50 years ago. And she said, I'll be down. So she came down, not as elegantly dressed as the lady before, but turns out she's the daughter of the woman that we had spoken to in 1944. And she wanted to know who it was that had given her mother the food. And I said, well, I'm the only one in the group that's still here. And she said, my mother was forever thankful for the wonderful rations you gave us. And as a tribute to America, she worked in a station hospital for 2 years, interpreting and helping the wounded. And she invited us in, and we had champagne, and there were children with us, and she sent out to get some candy for the kids and some pastry. And we had a wonderful afternoon, and she and I sat on the couch, and we talked through a friend of mine who was French-Canadian, John. She wanted to know all about my family, and I wanted to know about hers. And it turns out that she has a daughter by the name of Danielle. That's my first daughter's name. And then she has another daughter named Gabrielle. And my third daughter's middle name is Gabrielle. So we thought that was very amusing. And she invited us back. And I went back the next year, and we took her out to dinner and had an absolutely wonderful time with her. And come to find out that she was of a French noble family. She was Comtesse de la Gardin, as had her mother been. And I was perplexed about her having the family name. And she says, in France, she said, a noble family can use the name of their ancestor. And I don't remember what her married name was, but she had 3 daughters too, just like I did. And
good stories.
And I've gone back to see her several times and take her a little gift every once in a while. And
let me ask you some quick follow-up questions types, and then we're just about done. I'm almost out of tape. But being a veteran and an American citizen, what does freedom mean to you, Horace?
Well, it's trite, but it's not free. You have to constantly work for it. And when I'm speaking at schools with children, I remind them of this. You have to guard your freedom. You cannot let anything interfere with that freedom. You practice it. You see that everyone enjoys it and appreciates it. And if you hear someone disparaging the country, just say, yes, there are things wrong with this country, but remember, we are free and we want to remain free, and you have to struggle for it. It's not giving up at all. You have to work.
What would you tell these same young people about the price or the cost for our freedoms?
I think that I tell them that it came at a tremendous cost, and that all those who perished in the wars deserve credit, and especially those who didn't make it back. They sacrificed their life, perhaps not willingly, but they sacrificed themselves.
What does the American flag mean and represent to you as a veteran?
It means that the symbols are all there, and going all the way back to the Revolution, of course, and it's to be honored. When I'm at home in Rhode Island, I fly it every day, all night, and I have a light on the flag, and it's a symbol of everything that we stand for, a symbol. I'm not one who said that you can burn the flag, but also you don't desecrate it either. And you don't fly it upside down. You look at the flag and you think of all of those who have gone before you.
What should our country remember about World War II?
That it was something that we would not have been involved in if we had not the attack on Pearl Harbor. But to remember the tremendous struggle, if we had not gone to war, we might now be speaking another language which we don't want. Remember that we fought for what was right. We fought for freedom, even though that was not uppermost in everyone's mind at the time. You have to learn to accept things as they come, and to very definitely be willing to sacrifice.
Are you proud that you're a World War II veteran?
Yes, and I take part in all kinds of World War II activities besides reenacting in France. In fact, I'm scheduled for Memorial Day in Hartford, Connecticut. I'll be representing the Second World War. A friend of mine was in Korea, Marshall, and he will represent Korea. And then we have another veteran from Vietnam who will be dressed in his Vietnam uniform. We have someone who is going to dress in a World War I uniform. And a friend of Marshall's is going to dress in a Civil War uniform, and another man in a Revolutionary War uniform. And Marshall and his wife, Carolyn, participate in all kinds of military activities. Carolyn will dress as a wife of a Revolutionary veteran. And she's a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and very proud of her heritage, too.
And I'm assuming people have thanked you for your service over the years?
Over and over and over. Sometimes it's almost embarrassing, but I try to accept it gracefully and not be embarrassed about it.
Did you ever have problems after the war of any kind, nightmares or anything like that?
For the first 25 years, I had nightmares. And my wife would wake me and she'd say, you know, Mitch, you're dreaming. And I'd roll over and go back to sleep. And then I had an experience which changed all of that. In one of the reenactments, I went back to France. And the reenactor said, you know, we're going out in a Higgins, and we're going to come back in to shore. And we did, but when we got near shore, he dropped the ramp and everybody had to wait out in water. And when we got to the little restaurant where we were going to have morning coffee, it was like I was transformed. I was beginning to be able to speak about my experiences, and I've never shut up since.
Good for you. You're doing good. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. At the end of my interviews, I always ask the veteran to give me a salute into the camera.
Okay.
Where you're seated when I ask you, can you do that for me?
Oh, sure.
Let me set the camera here. All right. Okay, go ahead, right in the camera. Great, thank you.